We create levels for the players to explore and enjoy, but one of the toughest levels to create is that of dynamic, exciting boss battles, and that's what we're going to be focusing on today. Hey everyone, I hope you're well, playing on and making the games that you all love. You're joining me, your host, Principal Mission Designer, Max Bears. Absolute pleasure to be chatting with all of you today. I hope that you are well and having a great time, whether you're listening to this morning, evening, noon, or night. I appreciate you. So yeah, I wanted to talk about boss battles in level design. We've not really spoken about this before, and I think it was something that to me was brought by Rana Jani. I hope I pronounced the name correct there for it, Rana, your last name for it. But Rana wanted to know more about designing for boss encounters, and alongside as well, Geralt of Normandy, which all people up on Twitter, when I was posting stuff about that of the boss area I'm doing in my own personal God of War level. And I think there is some thought and people curious about, well, how do boss levels work and whose responsibility is it? And really, the sad, most common answer we always say, each company is very different. So I wanted to kind of go through these different ones and discuss that of the elements of what it takes and my experience in working on boss battles. I've only worked on a couple, some that never saw the light of day, some that will. And I think that it's an interesting one all around for it. So we're going to be going through the different aspects for it and what you need to consider for it.
But first, let's have a quick word from today's sponsor. Today's sponsor is none other than me. What I've done, everyone, and I hope you're excited for this, is I've actually created a level design kind of store. What I've done in this store is put up different kinds of tips and tricks that you can find there, whether that be my actual ebook itself to that of level design pamphlets focused on different things such as traversal, stealth, breaking into the industry, as well as different talks that I have done which you cannot find anywhere else other than on this store. So if you are looking to improve on your level design skills and processes, then check out the Level Design Store, which will be down in the description below, where there'll be a link to find this. All you need to do is head over to gumroad.com/level design lobby. I hope you like what you see, and I look forward to hearing your thoughts. Thank you, and now back to the show.
Now, the first one we can go through is that if the team is big enough, there are actually boss design departments for it. And for me, that was my first experience when designing a boss. I was working with a great designer called Benjamin, who'd worked on I don't know when it came out again, but it was a title called Fury, which was all about bosses and kind of like a bullet hell boss battle after boss battle. It was really fascinating for it. So I got to work with him on Cyberpunk. This is the one that never saw the light of day, not because of the fact that it was banned. Let's stress that point, but it was just more, didn't have the time and the mission had completely changed for it. And from this, it comes down to us having a kickoff meeting, right? Us kind of figuring out, alongside that of narrative as well, and figuring out what it is we want from the boss battle, what can we actually do with the boss battle, and what are we able to use to highlight different mechanics for it. So we need to really think about a few of those different aspects when making that of the boss encounter. So we might get a list of moves, a list of metrics that we need to use to help sell that. So that could come in firstly for when it was on that one example, it was on that of a scene. So we need to make sure there's enough space for our cinematic to take place, understanding how we transition getting into it and then getting out into the boss arena for it. And it's funny because you can actually still visit, not necessarily the interior, but the exterior of where the boss battle was going to take place in Cyberpunk. I'll leave that for people to go off and explore for it. But it was a great example of figuring that out, because you'd think, oh, it's just a cutscene, we just come in, just come out. But again, it's how we set up the space for the scene. So obviously, we need to be discussing with the narrative for the metrics for them to relay, and also animation. So they're like, well, how do we do it as well? What can we use this space for? What is this space? What are we trying to sell with it, right? And I think for me, that was the first part: is how do we think about cinematics and boss battle? It's that seamless transition that we go for that sets the tone. Like, I'm sure many of you have seen a documentary, Grounded, now. But if you remember in the Last of Us 2, the boss battle with the Rat King, where it surprises Abby and she has to crawl through the ambulance, and then that leads to a small chase that then gets into it. That there is part of figuring out how we get a player from A to B, right? And for us, it was that kind of first challenge of how do we do that point. And that was really a one where, again, we want to make it memorable because we're introducing such a strong character. And another thing is the way to make the transition exciting, so that players like, oh god, it's about to go down. And that was a really important one for us for it. We had some really cool ideas. I don't think I can go too much detail about them, but that was the first part of it, right? And that's still something that you see today. Is there's normally always some form of introduction to it, or some sort of small encounter to make sure we're able to get the player and the boss into the actual arena for it. Sometimes you will just walk into it, but there's a lot of setup now. If you look, boss design's really changed a lot. We still have the very traditional, thank goodness, if you go play God of War Valhalla, right? Like the tier fights, and there's other fights as well, but they still have giant boss battle bar, 3 stages. Again, when I say this, there's nothing wrong with it. I love God of War. Many people know that. It's more of, we've seen that kind of transition into something where it's almost more cinematic and less of that traditional boss design for it. If we take a look at, say, Red Dead Redemption 2, or even some examples on the Last of Us, they actually they've removed that of like 3-stage boss design in some ways. Not everyone, or that they're trying to make it feel more realistic and much more focus on the narrative impact versus that of a multiple stage boss fight. Neither is wrong or right. I think that's the next point to think about it, is that we need to make sure we understand what the game is, right? Like, if you have those ones where you know that you have a team dedicated to it, you're going for the much more traditional 3-stage boss battle in an arena or something, then that's good to know. But if you're chasing more of a narrative feeling for it, you might want to do it where you don't have necessarily the boss's health bar, and your encounter with them isn't so much on, say, damaging the boss, but more of relaying a certain narrative to the player, whether that this boss is very feeble and weak, so it's a constant us chasing them sort of thing, or that the boss can't be beaten right now, it's super powerful. If you think of Uncharted, I think it's 4, yeah, where the giant like armored truck chases the player along the way, so we are like, oh my god, we can't beat it. Then eventually you hook onto it. So it's doing a pacing more from a narrative than is for that of the boss, right? And it all ties in super well for that. So bosses have changed a lot, and as I said, each game is very different. So understand that as the first part for the game. The second thing I think talking about is the mechanics. So you really need to, now a boss designer will handle this side, but if it's not and it's just on you, then, and this is one of the big differences I'd say between being, say, a mission designer or quest designer versus that of a level designer, right? Like level design, we just make the area speak to everyone and make sure this area encompassed it. Someone else would work on it and do more communications, but we don't touch the boss so much. We have suggestions, we talk, these kind of elements. Other times when you're in this role of, like I said, a quest and mission designer, you control everything in that mission, right? So you need to be the one pushing and understanding and trying to get all the information so that you can use that to make something far more interesting for it. And that to me is one of the biggest challenges for that, right? Like, we really have to go out of the way to speak to our game designers, our mechanic designers, and see what their mechanics do we have to use, right? What is it that we have available to us as that the player has at hand? What can we exaggerate, right? Like if we have, for example, Mario with jumping, right? He always has to land on the enemy's head, right? Or what can we do to push that to the extreme? Like I'm sure if we look at Mario Odyssey with all those rabbits, right? They have different move sets that involves us to jump before we can even do damage. So we're really pushing our core mechanic further and further and further. It might be, say, shooting. Well, now, okay, we can't shoot in the Plague's Tale with the slingshot. You can't shoot enemies with the armor, right? So you have to go and shoot down some of their weak spots to remove the armor to create vulnerability for your attacks to actually cause damage. So it's this kind of element where you're studying the core of your game and learning, well, what are you actually able to use? What are you able to push further and further and further? And that to me is one of the most exciting, but also kind of nerve-wracking element, because sometimes you may have a limited mechanical set, right? Like sometimes you might not, you never know. And also we got to tie that in with the narrative. Like we have to be realistic for it, right? We can't just go, okay, well, now we're going to throw in Gundams into this fight, but our game takes place in, say, for example, the 1940s. It doesn't work like that, right? And then we have to know the narrative tone of this fight as well. So there's a lot of those elements coming in towards that. So speak to your mechanic designers, understand what do they believe. Maybe there's a mechanic they really think that's worth showing off, right? Really push that further for it. I think the more that you understand of your game and understand from different teammates, the more you'll be able to use and actually show off great different elements. And we touched on a bit there with syncing with narrative. That is one of the most important things for it as well, right? We have that of narrative teams, writers, and we're seeing a lot of obviously huge successful narrative driven games right at the moment. And I think we're always trying to figure out how do we sell the narrative in the spaces we have. And I think that to me is something that is really vital as well. If we're wanting a player to feel fear, if we're wanting a player to feel a sense of helplessness, how do we do that? As I said, do we make the enemy invulnerable for it? Do we have it where certain moves are unblockable, so you have to now dodge, right?
At Level Design Lobby, we believe everybody has a story to tell. Hobbyist or student, freelancer or veteran, we made it our mission to unite those who share our passion for creating and developing great games. Thanks to our generous Patreon backers, we've been able to do just that. So if you've already pledged your support, thank you. If not, you too can ensure the future of Level Design Lobby, helping us to create even more exciting content, collaborations, interviews, and much more. With awesome perks and rewards, whether you're a seasoned professional or just getting started, you're sure to find something for you. Want to share tips, tricks, and advice with passionate, like-minded developers? Our awesome community Discord has you covered. Fancy practicing your level design, creating strong portfolio content, and having fun? Then try our level design weekends. Or perhaps you want to individually discuss your work, hone your skills, or level up your career? Then consider our one-on-one mentorships. If you share our vision, then go to patreon.com/Level Design Lobby for more information and to pledge your support. Thank you.
I mean, God, the whole combat system of the entire Dark Souls and all of theirs, right, is the mastery of learning the move set for it. But they also have narrative ties that people can get lost in. You can watch all these lore videos on it, and some players might notice it, some not. But thinking about the move set, thinking about where the actual boss battle is set as well, we trying to invoke different feelings in the player from that as well. It's these kind of questions that we need to ask ourselves and figure out and tie it in. So speak with your narrative designers. Think about how we can sell that and have that discussion with your art team. What can we do to make this space feel different, have more of an epic feel with it, right? I think that's super important for getting the player to believe that, like, and connect with it. I think that to me is one of the most amazing things. One of my favorite boss battles is the actual chase in Metal Gear Solid 3. I forgot what was the Shadow something. It was originally, it's supposed to be the first prototype of the Metal Gear, but when that's chasing Snake and Eva on the bike, and you're just constantly pelting it with like RPGs, different bullets, and it's not necessarily working, but it's very exhilarating because you're like, oh god, like we're on the run. These sort of things. So you can also see if you have budget in the team to create these one-off experiences, right? And this is the least fun side, I guess, when it comes to that of making boss battles, is the budget, right? Like having to discuss with your production team as well as you'll talk with your leads or directors of different departments. What do you have available? And it's a weird thing to think about, and it's not always a fun thing to think about. But like, some people will say, "Oh, you got unlimited budget, don't worry about it," and that's amazing if you're ever in that position, right? Like, other places they don't have the budget for, right? Teams are much smaller. Some places have up to 300 to, if not almost to 1,000. Others have 100 or 50. You know what I mean? So it really depends again what you have. So you have to try to figure out ways to get your design ideas within the budget that is doable and feasible. I know this isn't the fun side of it, right? Like, it's definitely not something that I'm like, yes, finally. But it is just part and parcel of what we do. So I think understanding more and more of the cost and really getting that out of the way first and foremost. Is this the first mission of the game where we need to really drag the player's attention, or is it the last mission where we need to make sure it ends on such a high? These tend to get more budget, but you can have it where maybe stuff like side quests don't normally get that, right? So understand where you fall into that system, have the conversation with production. All of that is super important to discuss. Again, it's not the fun side. It's not not the one that I'm trying to stifle creativity. But by having those restraints as well, it allows you to think slightly differently. It allows you to go off and make something interesting for it. So I think there's some great elements to think about for it. And that's kind of the ones that I kind of want to explain with boss design. So I hope this has been interesting, and I hope it answers those questions that were talked about up on Twitter as well, because I really appreciate everyone asking more questions for it. And yeah, it's a different side of level design that some people get to be a part of. Like, some people get to design the opening mission in their career, which is a very tough and challenging point, and other people may never get a chance to, and not because of skills, but because of the way production works out, right? I don't know if we ever talked about tutorial levels. Maybe that's something we can discuss for next time for it. But always remember is to understand the narrative, your team structure, the mechanics that you have available to you, where it takes place, and then the budget that you have. All of these will really play into designing fascinating bosses and going from that point there, team with it. So yeah. Alright, as I said, I really hope that you've enjoyed this episode and this new format where you get to see a little bit more of my face if you're watching on YouTube. And remember to get in contact. You can do so through the email leveldesignlobby@gmail.com. Do it so through Twitter, which is @MaxPairs. And take care of yourself if you do want to support the show. We just have $1 tier just to help make sure we make great stuff. So thank you all very much, and I'll catch you all next time.